Welcome to the 21st Century Business Forum. I'm your host, Jon Gordon, and today our guest is Brian Solis. Brian is a world-renowned digital anthropologist and futurist who has been named by Forbes as one of the more creative and brilliant minds of our time. He serves as the Global Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce.com. He's an 8-time best-selling author, and this interview is going to be amazing. I can't wait for you to see it. Let's get started. Hey, Brian, it is so great to have you with us with the 21st Century Business Forum. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, John, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, as we move into 2021, we're halfway there. You talked about how the economy has evolved into the novel economy or Generation N. Can you explain what that means?
Well, as a digital anthropologist, I've always studied how technology trends and waves have changed the course or the trajectory of behaviors. And when those behaviors change enough in unison, that is what changes markets, or that's what forms new markets. And what I explicitly looked at in the last year was breaking away from, well, actually, let me take a step back. You know, when life events happen, or when it comes time to change, as human beings, we tend to find every reason not to do something. And what I had found in that year was that we were already in this pattern of groupthink quickly, which was react. I get that. We had to react with the pandemic. We had to work from home. We had to set up e-commerce. We had to do a lot of things to try to ensure stabilization and continuity. But shortly thereafter, we started to hear language like new normal and next normal. And that's our way as human beings trying to find some sense of comfort of which we can operate from with like some familiarity, if you will. However, if we were to return to any kind of normal or seek any kind of normal, we would have missed the lesson in this disruption and the opportunities that it offered. So what I started to study was what I called the novel economy, inspired by the novel coronavirus. What it means is just simply new and unusual. There's no playbook, and there's no need to look for a playbook. There's no need to try to look to the past to see what we did when you have an opportunity to explore what you could do differently or what you should have been doing differently. Going back to, for example, Amazon launching in 1994, Netscape 1994, the iPhone 2005, 2006, Facebook 2006, Instagram, TikTok, all of those have been major events that have changed the course of our markets. And a lot of what we're doing today is catching up for 20 plus years. So the novel economy became a construct. Phase 1, yes, react. Phase 2, we reacted. Let's pay attention to how people are changing, because they are, as a result of this pandemic. And let's look at where we can start to change our trajectory, do the things that are going to help us get to phase 3, which is, of course, operational innovation, product and service innovation. And then where do we go next? What is phase 3 post-pandemic? COVID is with us in limited capacity, but we're able to start to stretch our legs and use that as a framework to build a better business model of what we have and explore business model innovation so that we could be successful in the future.
That is so great. How did we change this year, and what does that say about our future as we go forward?
It's a great question, because I didn't address part of your first question, but I get to address it this time, which is generation novel. So what I had as a digital anthropologist, I went right to people, you, me, our families, our friends, our colleagues. How did we change? It's quite profound. So generation novel was this concept of, well, if we all become digital first as a matter of necessity. So that is, we're learning from home, we're working from home, we're shopping from home, Netflix, you name it, we're being entertained, games, social media. What does that rapid acceleration of all things digital do to us? Well, a couple of things. One is that it makes us accidental narcissists. It means that we need what we want: personalized, fast, convenient, efficient, intuitive, even predictive in some cases. And then you add to it the psychology of a global pandemic, which created a somatic marker within each and every one of us. So we will all, in our own way, have this deep, visceral, emotional bookmark, how we recall these times, some of it good, some of it bad. And if you stop to think about the fact that the world is opening up, there are going to be things that you miss about this pandemic, and there are going to be things that you don't miss. But it also got you to start thinking about new habits, new behaviors, new values. For example, we saw the rise of sporting goods, baking, cooking, hiking, cycling. We saw future travel booked. We saw time spent in backyards and barbecues with family. We saw people move to the suburbs or to other places where they said they always wanted to live, or did all the things that they said they would always want to do. And so that sort of like that meaning of life moment, added to the accidental narcissism, has changed the trajectory of humanity, but also when it comes to business, consumer behaviors, whether that's B2B, B2C, B2C, whatever it is. So that phase 2, phase 3 of the novel economy, studying this generation novel, it's not about millennials or centennials or boomers or Gen X. It's this: we're all the same now. We all have these common behaviors, these common interests, and these common aspirations that we can solve for when it comes to operational and business and service and experience innovation. So it's a lot, it's a mouthful, but we did change. And that's, I think, where businesses also need to dedicate a lot of time and resources. We have AI, we have automation, we can understand this data better to make sense of this. But lastly, it also signals that how businesses were operationalized before. We might have said we're customer centric, but that might have been more of like a mindset. Now you literally have to design the business around the consumer, because they're not going to go back to normal. They're only going to continue to evolve. And businesses before the pandemic we already know that they were siloed. Data was siloed, politics, egos, you name it. But that there's no room for that to compete in the future. In fact, that is the Achilles heel. And unless businesses start to solve for that, we're watching a bunch of Blockbuster and Kodak moments start to unfold now, because essentially what I'm saying is the pandemic was the first disruption. Now, with markets shifting and evolving rapidly, there's a next disruption on the horizon.
What is the next disruption? And I know you talk a lot about innovation. What must we do to innovate or adapt? I think this past year taught us that if you don't innovate, if you don't adapt, you are done. So I think for most of us, we had to change. We were forced to change. In the past, it was optional. This past year, I don't think it was optional. So one, what does it say about innovation and adaptation? And then what is the next disruption that's coming?
Oh, well, John, how much time do we have? All right. Well, it's important to understand, and I'll just say this for the benefit of the audience, that in my work, I focus 100% on innovation as a result of everything we just talked about: human behavior, opportunities for better experience, better relationships, I think, is what it's really about. My colleague Henry King and I, we wrote this series in the past several months called Relationship Transformation. It's sort of the North Star. What should a relationship look like in a post-pandemic economy? And I don't mean loyalty points and miles or what have you. I just mean, like, what is that relationship? If the brand was a human being, the business was a human being, what's our relationship look like, so that we can give technology a purpose, not just for the sake of digitization, but for the sake of actual relationship building. So that's a very basic level of, I think, where we should start. The next disruption that's coming in, and then what businesses should do about it, is the demands and expectations that happen when you become an accidental narcissist are very profound, but they're also very specific. I've written about, we don't have time to go into every one of these, but the aspects of what this customer wants. And this customer wants a lot of things that technology can deliver. And it's true in every industry, whether it's finance, healthcare, whether it's automotive, retail, consumer goods, you name it. And it's also true for business to business. So industrial shipping, supply chain, it's just the fact that it's all about people, and people are learning to no longer operate within divides in their life. Like, oh, well, that's Uber or that's DoorDash, so I shouldn't expect it from my healthcare provider, or I shouldn't expect it from my bank. It's now all, experience standards are all blurring the line over the last year. So the next disruption that's going to happen is choice. In the last year, McKinsey's found that this is true all around the world, and the numbers vary, some more dramatically than North America. But North America, 75% of us tried a competitive brand during this time. And 83% of us are going to stick with that new brand post-pandemic. So that essentially says, that is the next disruption. And if you don't believe it's happening to your business, it is. And there are a lot of reasons why they started to experiment, and there's a lot of reasons why they're sticking with that new brand. And the other wave of disruption that's coming is every single investor or every single smart executive that's paying attention to this is going to continue to try to pull those customers away from you because they can. So the rapid solution is to figure out why they left and why they're staying away from you. And hopefully you have access to data and third-party data, but that's where I would prioritize my work, is to figure that out, because it's solvable. And in fact, in many cases, it's more basic than you imagine. But lastly, it's a big question, John, sorry. And lastly, there's a difference between innovation and iteration. And before the pandemic, I've been helping businesses understand that when they talk about innovation, what they're really talking about is iteration, which is, making things better, right? So AI, we saw the adoption of artificial intelligence skyrocket this last year. Because they wanted to introduce, for example, chatbots in service, which seems super innovative. We're putting artificial intelligence in front of human beings to interact with them and answer their questions and solve their problems before we have to bring a human on board. But the way that it was implemented was iterative, in that we took IVRs, we took knowledge bases, and we just simply digitized that process. When in fact, it was an opportunity to create new value, which is what innovation means. And that new value could be in the form of an experience, a process, revenue. And an example of innovation might be, how could we predict what people want and use the chatbot to get right to that based on their history of purchases or previous engagements, and introduce a better dialogue that someone might say, wow. Because when you design for that, that keeps someone feeling like they want to stick around. And we could unpack that at another time, but hopefully that answers your question, John.
Yeah, I love that you wake up thinking about this every single day, because most of us don't. And so you're doing this for us, which is great. But as you're talking, what I'm thinking about is the fact that the reason why it's easy to try another competitor or another company is because when your relationship is online, it's not as personal. And so it seems like companies today then have to really figure out how to develop the loyalty and the relationship in a digital world. Is that something that you think about often?
Yeah, that's what inspired Henry and I to write this series on relationship transformation. It's because I've also studied digital transformation going back way too long. And the commonality there was that it started with IT, and it was a mechanism of modernizing aging equipment, aging systems, et cetera. So it wasn't done with what we're talking about, which was, how do we use technology to deliver the type of relationships that our customers want, or they don't know they want yet, and when they have it, that's the new standard for engagement. And that's where my work is focusing, is helping businesses realize that IT is the enabler to something better. It can't just be a technology first solution. I think it was Steve Jobs who said, when he came back to Apple after his ouster, he was asked by a cynic in the audience, what did he plan on doing differently at Apple to save it from its demise? And yeah, it was a powerful moment. It's on Google. It was recently re-released or on YouTube. It's and it's a super grainy, horrible quality video, but it is powerful. And you could tell he's at a loss for words. He starts to answer it, And then he stops. And then he just comes back as if this was rehearsed. And he says, you have to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. And that is so true now. And that's the answer. When people start to experiment, it could have been something as easy as your journey, your touch points, your e-commerce, your search box on your website. Like those things are irritants, and they cause friction, and they force the customer to invest effort in something that, if you go to Uber, for example, it's effortless, right? Your biggest challenge there is how far a car is away from you, not because the app is anything difficult. And I think that's the importance. And I'll give you one last example, John, is that, that Uber has to, and Lyft, or any innovator, has to constantly try to be innovative. It goes in waves. It's in fact, in Silicon Valley, we call it the jumping the curve. So you have your first wave of innovation and adoption, and you grow it. Every business has to go through this, but at some point it's going to plateau. What's your next wave? Because most companies are just all in on that one wave. And you have to constantly jump. And for Uber, one of the things I studied just to demonstrate what accidental narcissists, like the power of accidental narcissism, and why they were going to leave you if you didn't invent. And we saw that accelerate in the last year. How long is too long to wait for an Uber before you open the Lyft app? We've all done it. And that number over the past, Uber launched in 2010, and we still talk about it as if it's brand new. That number started at 15 minutes. And now, on average, Uber advertises that you'll be picked up in 3 minutes and 37 seconds. They advertise that because it knows that you're impatient. So there are little things like that in every aspect of how you do business that you can improve upon today. So iteration, while you also look at ways to introduce new value.
So good. You talk about what separates ideation from impact, and you say it's action, community building, and creating value. Can you talk about that process and why it's so important?
You know me better than me. I like how you just said, I'm going to borrow that, even if I said it before. Yeah, that I've spent a lot of time with startups in addition to helping big brands. And the reason why is because that spirit of innovation with startups is contagious, because they're literally inventing markets. And I always hear businesses, and I better write this down because I don't want to forget the original question you asked. But this is an important offshoot, which is, businesses will find every reason not to do something. Executives will say, we can't do that. We don't have enough resources. There's not enough time. And so they talk themselves out of actually doing what they need to be doing. But innovators in the startup world don't. Their whole reason for being is to go make the impossible happen. So they have the idea, but then they go and execute. And the minute they take money from an investor, they're on the hook to make that idea a reality, and not just a reality that's going to return 1,000x on $1 million. And so when I hear, or tens of millions of dollars, or $100 million, when I hear an executive say, we can't do that, or we need to measure for ROI, well, then let's go to the startup playbook and ask them, how did you convince someone to give you $100 million? What was your ROI for that? Oh, well, the market doesn't exist. How are you going to make that market in return $1 billion on that 100 million? So the math exists, the drive exists. And so that's the idea of shifting from ideation into action, into impact, and then creating your own milestones along the way to document that you're on the right track. And if you're not, pivot. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in pivoting. They talk about it in Silicon Valley as fail fast, fail forward, or just simply try and learn and move, whatever language you want to use. But we have to all embrace that spirit of ambition. But lastly, we all have the ability within us. We all have the traits to be creative, and to be innovative. And those are things that were taught out of us, as Sir Ken Robinson told us when we were kids. If you think about our education system, if you think about the rules that we have along the way as we grow up, if you think about the hierarchy and the linear forms of thinking within traditional business today, none of that has room for the spirit of creativity and the spirit of innovation. They're within us. They just need to be flexed, and they also need to be practiced. And that is where culture comes in, and leadership, as you know. This is a time, I think, for innovation, not just in business models, but in mindsets and how we work together, and how we want to work together differently moving forward.
It sounds like as you fail, you have to fail forward. You have to learn from it. You have to grow from it. And you say that a business will go through several phases along the way. They survive, alive, and thrive is something that you talk about. Can you take us through that journey, and can you just define each? I think I know what survive means, but a lot of people had to survive these times right now to stay alive, to ultimately thrive. But what does it mean for the company, but also I would say individual too, because I would believe and say individuals had to go through the same phases during this time as well.
Yeah, so that comes back to the idea of the novel economy. So phase one, phase two, phase three was those, and so Thrive is phase three, which was exploring everything that we've been talking about, and looking at new ways to invent or to create new value while we still make our existing stuff better. But essentially, it's that next wave of innovation, jumping that curve so that we're protecting ourselves in the future. One of the other things that I've been thinking about too was your leadership's ability to execute in new frontiers. I'll give you an example. I think you've heard it a million times. I've heard it a million times. If Blockbuster had only acquired Netflix when it had the opportunity, it wouldn't be in the business graveyard of woulda, shoulda, coulda. And the reality is that even though Netflix tried to sell itself to Blockbuster, I think the number was like $50 million. It still would have died within Blockbuster's leadership, because that organization wasn't conditioned, primed, or nor did it believe it needed to think about the world differently in order to compete differently. And that's why where we see companies like Walmart excel so wonderfully, is that when they acquire a company, they acquire both the market and the technology and everything that makes that company successful, but they also acquire the leaders, and they put those leaders in the HQ. They didn't do this at first, but they figured out that they had to disrupt themselves in order to compete against disruptors. And that, I think, is where phase two, which isn't just survive, but to stay alive, you have to disrupt yourself. And disrupting yourself means it's not just a buzzword. What it means is that you're starting to do new things that make the old things obsolete. So you're challenging yourself to learn forward and unlearn so that you can accelerate that transformation.
I love the way you talk about leadership and how it would have failed even if it had been bought because the leaders weren't ready. And you talk about how leaders have to be more committed to the stakeholders than the shareholders. Can you talk about the importance of stakeholders? I love that distinction between the two.
Yeah, excuse me. Eric Ries actually did something that I was so impressed by. When you are shareholder beholden, you are caught up in quarter performance, and I get that. I totally get it. It, though, prevents you from innovating. It forces you into a pocket of iteration at best, where you're constantly trying to take that wave and do the best you can, squeeze everything you can out of that stone, and return as much as you can. But it gets you into this repetitive cycle of thinking within this box. And in that box, even though you're actually trying to improve performance, the world around you is shifting for longer term opportunities or disruptions, however you want to look at it, or both. And Eric Ries said, we should reward companies for thinking about longer term gains. And so he started a market for companies that wanted to be traded for those longer term strategies. So that means you're in it for the long game. I can tell you that the mindset when you focus on shareholders is that you look at things like innovation, you look at things like digital transformation as cost centers because they are taking away from the potential short-term return of your investors. But when you take a stakeholder view, what is the value to my stakeholders? And your stakeholders are employees and customers because they are interrelated. And you look at ways to deliver value for them, of course, for the short term, but also for the longer term, you will have greater gains for the market because you will retain customers and you will acquire customers. And those are the two key attributes for growth. But at the same time, you will retain good employees and train them to be better and acquire exceptional talent, which will also impact customer experience as well. So this is a time where actually every single business has to invest in the things it doesn't want to invest in order to not just thrive, but survive. And my work and my research and my passion is all dedicated to what I call a prelude to innovation, which is getting that executive to realize that the change starts within them, that they have to realize that if they're waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, they're on the wrong side of innovation. So they become the stakeholder, they become the champion to then, it's contagious after that to bring people together to start moving in new directions.
We do a lot of leadership training with our company, and we always find that a lot of times leaders will not come, they'll send other leaders, but they won't come themselves. How important is it for continued training, digital training, and for leaders to invest in training and also attend themselves so that they can be prepared for the future innovation? I know you do a lot of that. You talk a lot about that. How important is that in this world?
It's everything. It's everything, John. That's, I think no one knows that better than you. I eat my own dog food. I'm constantly having to learn new things and unlearn old things, even to just stay relevant. Because if I don't, then what value do I offer people as this dynamic world is changing? So yeah, executives don't like to hear this because every decision they've made, every job they've had, every role that they've served has gotten them to where they are. And why would we challenge that? Except success is a poor teacher when it comes to innovation because it lulls you into mediocrity and into this comfort zone that gets so comfortable it becomes suffocating and difficult to move in new directions. But in fact, one of the things I really admired about GE, for example, is they used to do this, and they still do it, I'm sure, reverse mentoring model where they would take leaders and partner them with younger employees on the leadership track. And they'd work together for a matter of weeks in every facet, and they would see the dynamics of how each other works. And you can't help but appreciate empathy in those models. But that's the thing. The minute you think you have nothing to learn or unlearn, you're on a path to disruption.
Talk about your book, Life Scale, and why you wrote it and why it's special to you.
It's the first book that I've written that isn't a business book, and it wasn't actually on my horizon. I was actually trying to write a different book, and as I was frustrated with my inability to express that idea in the form of an outline, I just started to look at first I chalked it up to writer's block. But then I realized that it was just a reflection of a lot of things in my life that were just coming to a head, things that I hadn't dealt with or that pushed off or ignored or didn't see. And life scale became a 2-year journey of realizing that every facet of our life, especially with these things in our personal lives, tell us a different story than really what our narrative should be. Meaning that we're moving and reacting to life. We're not actually our own captain moving in a direction where we really need to move, and then using these devices, technology, making decisions in ways that move us toward that North Star every single day. So life scale became a way of documenting how to break out of that cycle, and then actually assembling the tools and processes and decisions needed to move in a desired direction, which was, how do I scale my life in this way that's going to make me do everything every single day that puts me in that direction. And the hardest part about it, believe it or not, was breaking the digital addiction that we all have in whether we know it or not, and also the emotional and psychological triggers that are associated with the way that we use these things. I didn't even realize that was a thing until it became the mechanism that was preventing me from doing other. Like, for example, set a Pomodoro clock for 25 minutes. Do nothing else and just try to focus for 25 minutes straight. Don't look at your phone. Don't go to the bathroom. Don't get a glass of water. Don't respond to that text message. It's incredibly difficult. And it's because we've been rewired over the last, since 2005 with smartphones, really. We've been rewired to accelerate our life, to react to everything, to multitask. And what that does, it sort of prevents this depth of thought, of reflection, of being present in the moment, and giving your best self in that moment too, whether it's somebody else or whether it's to your work, or whether it's to a hobby that actually builds your strength and your creativity. And so it's a long story of just basically saying life scale became the way that I fixed my life, and then I documented the process because there wasn't a lot of answers out there, to then help others that might be like me as well.
That is so good. Yeah, I think everyone is thinking the same thing. They're struggling. People can't even sit down and read a book anymore because of their phone and everything going on in their life. So I love that. As we come to a close, Brian, I'd love to just ask you, you're an 8-time best-selling author. You've written a lot of amazing books, but as we look forward, if you were going to give us a title or a suggestion or 3 tips for the next book, or maybe it's a book you've already written, what are some takeaways that we can take with us for the coming year as we think about innovation, as we think about changing in our own lives and also in our businesses? What can we do differently that will make us better as we go forward?
Well, John, I mean, you just look behind you. I mean, you're a master of all of this. So hopefully, what I share will have value. I think if I had to just share one thing, it would be hit pause. Just hit pause for a minute and take a few moments to just say, look, we've all been disrupted. We all came into this disruption pretty equally. We don't have to emerge from it equally, though. We don't have to emerge who we are. We don't have to try to strive for a new normal or next normal. This is a rare gift, if we can see it that way, a Control-Alt-Delete moment to create that future we always said we wanted to create. So ask yourself a few questions. What didn't you love about yourself or what you were doing or your behaviors before the pandemic? What don't you love about the habits you've picked up during this pandemic? What are the things you loved about you before the pandemic? And what are the things you love about you that you've picked up during it? And let's start to just reflect about who you are and who you want to be coming out of this. What are some of the things preventing you from doing those things? And lastly, challenge yourself to in every moment, whether it's a meeting, whether you're having dinner with your loved ones or friends, or you're doing work, do everything you can to just be present, because there's nothing greater of a gift than someone else or something else feeling all of what you have to offer in that moment. It's That's hard and it's rare, but I think I'll leave you with those ideas, because that's actually what I'm reflecting on that all the time.
Mm. You really inspired me. You made me think about the fact that people could either look at this pandemic as something that stole their future or prepare them to create a great future. I want you to know that you just inspired that thinking. And I think you're inspiring many others to think differently as they move forward. I can see why you're renowned, incredible futurist and digital anthropologist, and really appreciate your wisdom today, Brian. And thanks for making us all better.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And thank you to our sponsors for making this podcast possible. And thank you to all the great people watching. We appreciate you. Join us next month where I will interview Patrick Lencioni, a pioneer in the organizational health movement and a best-selling author of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, The Motive, The Ideal Team Player, and other great books. You don't want to miss this one.